Finance ministers the world over are preoccupied with how to foster policies that will help their economies through a pandemic, but also foster growth on the other side of it, while maintaining some form of fiscal balance so that when all of this is over, of course, debt can be brought under control. As a former finance minister, you might think Bill Morneau is done with all of that, but as a candidate for Canada as Secretary General of the OECD, it is in fact still top of mind. Bill, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Amanda.
And I guess there's a little bit of irony that you should be done with this file, and yet you could be moving into a role, you want to move into a role where this is the single most pressing issue. And so I guess I want to start there with you. As you think through this, we get this pitch, Bill, that it's first you put the fire out and then you rebuild. And yet we know that the way economies work is you sort of have to be doing both at the same time. Are we getting it right here in Canada in terms of the policy mix that both helps during the emergency but also starts to think beyond it?
Well, first of all, let me just say that you're absolutely right that every finance minister around the world right now is thinking about what they're dealing with right now and what they're going to be dealing with. I think you have to do both those things at the same time, as you said. But the first order of business today is very much thinking about how do we support people, how do we support businesses so that as we get through the pandemic, we have an economy that can actually be successful. So my goal in putting forth my name for the Secretary General of the OECD is to work on developing those pandemic policies and the recovery policies that can help countries to get out of this as we get through what's likely to be a rocky recovery.
And made rockier perhaps by nations heavily indebted on the other side of this. When do we start to worry? I mean, here in Canada, obviously, we've got, a deficit that starts with a 3. And so there'll be some time, a long time to dig out of this. How concerned do we need to be? When does that become the preoccupation?
It's pretty clear that right now, in the course of what we're seeing with a second wave that is more difficult than I think anybody could have anticipated, it is a time to continue supporting people. Absolutely, Canada started out in a very positive situation from a fiscal standpoint, and I believe Canada will continue to be in that strong position. Around the world, all the other countries, of course, OECD members, as an example, are not in an equally advantageous position. So, in my estimation, Canada's taking the right approach. Support people and businesses through this. Of course, hopeful that we'll get to a new situation not that long in the future to deal with the health issues, and that'll help us to get out of it. The reason I'm so keen on the potential of being Secretary General of the OECD is I see that when we got into this, we had no playbook. We didn't have any evidence of what would work and what wouldn't work. And what we're going to see now is some emerging evidence from different approaches taken in different countries about how to get out of this. And that's I think, where we can work together multilaterally, hopefully, to get to better outcomes.
Multilateral, of course, is the name of the game, and there's been some success in recent decades for the OECD. It's a tough time for cooperation globally, led by the United States. Isolationism seems to be the theme. How big a challenge will it be to actually get countries to think of other nations as we draft our own policies for the future?
Well, I think obviously we're in a challenging moment. I think finding solutions on some immediate challenges hopefully will give people more confidence. One that's immediately on our agenda internationally is the issue of the taxation of the digital giants. My hope is that through the OECD, there's an ability to get to consensus on how we tax those organizations in the very near term. That could be a real confidence builder for other initiatives that we need to take together on things like climate policy, which are going to be tougher with more diversity of views. So you need to build success through small confidence measures, and I think digital taxation is one that's right there. Obviously, we're all going to be focused on pandemic recovery and how we can grow back better, greener, and we'll need to work together. These are not issues that can be solved by any one country.
Canada is in a unique position. It may be a model for some others, but the pivot from our heavily dependent on resource revenues to something else, to whatever that something else is, not just what we use, but actually how we generate revenue and grow businesses, is very live here. That is one sector that, when you were part of the government, chose not to do real targeted support for, like the airline industry, kept it broad, but never went sector specific. Can you tell us what the thinking around that is?
Well, in the early days of the pandemic, there was a realization that we were all hit. We were hit across the economy. A vast proportion of businesses were just closed down. So the best approach in that phase clearly is to support as broadly as possible. Of course, we had many people that just weren't able to work. So broad-based support was critical. There will be a next step, I'm sure, where sectoral discussions will have to happen. But that's not really appropriate for the emergency phase. So I think what I'm seeing the government do now, in my estimation, is appropriate. They're recognizing that we're still very much in a very challenging position. There's broad-based supports required. Some of those next steps, those issues around sectoral support, the good news is we'll have a little more evidence because we'll be farther along in this and be able to consider how best to do that. And that's, again, I think that the working together with other countries will provide some helpful examples of what's worked and what's not worked as people get to the next phase.
Is it inevitable that we see higher taxes here in Canada to help offset some of the both temporary and what now appear to be coming permanent costs that we are going to be absorbing?
My expectation is around the world, what people are going to see is that we do need to pivot to growth. We need to think about how we can grow out of this particular challenge that we're in. I think all governments will face the issue of thinking how best to do that and whether there's the revenue that they need. I really can't make a forecast other than to say that in Canada, there's a real opportunity for growing out of this, and that I hope will be something that will be positive for jobs, positive for businesses. And still, Canada's in a very favorable place in terms of its fiscal position, and I think an attractive place for people to live and work. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. We can share those opportunities with others around the world.
I think we can safely say that you left your role as finance minister and public life probably not at the time of your choosing. How difficult was that for you, given the fact that we're still in the middle of a crisis that you helped shepherd?
Well, the way I saw it was, there was the emergency phase. It was intense. We had to support people. There's the initial restart phase where we were trying to look at what to do next. Now we're in a rocky phase for sure. It's continued to be very difficult in a long-term recovery. My goal in this next step is really to think about how I can serve more broadly. So it was, from my standpoint, appropriate to think, how can I put my name forward for the Secretary General? There's a need to step back from being the Minister of Finance. And from the government standpoint, there's a long-term recovery. So they're going to need to think about how they address that. I'm happy to be doing this now, Amanda, and I think it's a place where I can continue to serve.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here, Bill. I know that, but do you think that you had the support you deserved from your Prime Minister at the time when you needed it?
Well, the way I look at this is I very much look at outcomes. We worked in partnership for 5 years. We made a really big difference. We made it so that middle-class Canadians felt stronger. They have more security around their retirement by our enhancement in the pension plan. We supported people through the pandemic. So when I look at those outcomes, I leave politics with a huge sense of accomplishment. And the Prime Minister and I worked together over a long period of time in trying to make that happen. So I leave with that positive point of view and look forward to the next set of opportunities. And I'm very supportive of where the government's at right now in trying to make sure we continue to protect people as we go through just an extremely challenging time for so many families across the country.
Bill, it is great to have you with us. We appreciate your time. That is Bill Morneau, former finance minister and Canada's representative as candidate for the Secretary General of the OECD.